Hey, welcome to another edition of David Anderson Talking Market Data. It is most definitely David Anderson talking, but I'm going to have a little bit of help. I'm not going to have a traditional guest in this particular episode. I've turned to AI, to artificial intelligence, and I've used a number of tools, and I've leveraged those tools to try and help explain, to feed into the debate, a debate that I'm very conscious of. That debate being, you have exchanges on the one side providing data to the market, and you have the market, customer firms, sell side and buy side on the other hand. And those two sides, I think it's fair to say there's a bit of angst between them. There's a bit of friction between them. The exchanges have been selling data for a long time, and they would advocate, as you're going to hear, that their data has value and it should be charged for on the basis of value, and they should invest in making that data even better. So you've got the exchanges on the one side, coupled with the aggregating data vendors. And then on the other side of the equation, you've got the customer firms. Now, the customer firms have been and continue to be quite upset, quite annoyed, quite emotive, really, about the cost of data from the likes of exchanges. They've turned to the regulators, they've lobbied regulators. There's been an awful lot of tension between these two sides. And I thought it might be just helpful to ask AI to help and sort of articulate a bit about the debate, the background, where the debate sits. I'm not taking sides on this. I'm really acting as an observer, and being an observer, I wanted to shine a light on this and try and help explain it so that you get a bit more insight into the debate, and you can take part in that debate. So I don't think there's a solution here. There's just information explaining what's going on. Let me know what you think about this format, this approach. Again, I stress these are not my points of view. They're me asking questions of AI and then presenting the answers to you. So on with the show. And by way of introduction, let's kick off the very first video, which was just a video that effectively addresses the whole topic.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the very lifeblood of our financial markets, market data. So why has this critical resource suddenly gotten so expensive and, well, so complicated? That's what we're going to dig into. Here's how we're going to break down this complex world. We'll kick things off by understanding the core problem. Then we'll meet the key players, figure out why there's so much pressure, see how the industry's reacting, and wrap it all up with a practical guide for what's next. All right, so this is the big question, right? The one that's giving financial firms all over the world a massive headache. To really get it, we've got to start from the beginning and understand how we even got here. To get a handle on today's challenges, we really need to rewind the clock a bit and see how the landscape of market data has changed over time. It's a story of how something simple got, well, not so simple. If you go back 20 years, this was all pretty straightforward. The main question was just, hey, how many terminals do you need? But then, electronic trading just exploded onto the scene, and that changed the entire game. The whole conversation flipped. It wasn't about the cost of delivery anymore, it was all about the value of the data itself. And that's when we saw the rise of these super complex licenses for machine-driven data. Now get this, the very same piece of information can have totally different price tags, all depending on whether a person looks at it or an algorithm uses it. Wild, right? So let's meet the key players in this ecosystem, because understanding their conflicting goals is absolutely crucial to figuring out why costs and complexity are soaring. And this slide right here, it just perfectly captures the core conflict. On one side, you've got the customers, the trading firms, and they are desperate for simplicity and fair pricing. On the other side, you've got the data suppliers, who see their product as a high-value asset, and, they want to price it that way. This fundamental disagreement is really what's at the heart of the whole issue. And wedged right in the middle, we have the intermediaries. These are the technology platforms that act as the essential plumbing. Now, they're crucial for connecting suppliers and customers, but they can also add their own layers of complexity to the whole mess. So what specifically makes this so hard to manage? It's not just one thing, but a combination of factors. Let's break down what I like to call the 4 horsemen of complexity. First up, we have misaligned licenses. You'd think terms like display for humans and non-display for machines would be universal, but they are not. The definitions actually vary from one supplier to the next, creating this confusing and frankly risky landscape for firms to navigate. Second, there's no standard way to count usage. It's crazy. One supplier might charge per user, another per device, and the third per server. For the firms trying to keep track of it all, this creates a major challenge. As you can see here, a single firm might have to track users, devices, and apps all at the same time just to stay compliant with everybody. It's a logistical nightmare, plain and simple. Third, the operational burden is just immense. Every vendor has its own rules for reporting, for audits, for policy changes. Now imagine managing that across hundreds of suppliers. It's a massive undertaking. And finally, we have what's called technical sprawl. With every new data stack you build, there's a risk that your actual usage will deviate from what's allowed in the contract, and that creates all these hidden compliance risks. With all this friction in the market, it's really no surprise that regulators are stepping in. Now, their focus isn't on price caps, but on a global push for much greater transparency. In Europe, new regulations are pushing for what's called a reasonable commercial basis. In plain English, that means clearer policies, public fees, and fairer audit rules. The goal is just to make the rules of the game transparent for everyone involved. Over in the US, the SEC is expanding the definition of what's considered core public data, while up in Canada, the focus is really on fee transparency and standardizing key terms. And in the Asia-Pacific region, we're seeing more of a piecemeal approach. Individual exchanges are refining their policies to provide more clarity on fees and, especially, automated data usage. So, how are the data suppliers, especially the exchanges, responding to all this regulatory pressure? Well, they have a very clear and consistent message. Their core argument is that market data isn't just some byproduct, it's a valuable product in its own right. The fees they charge, they argue, are absolutely essential for funding the technology and infrastructure that keep our markets safe and reliable for everyone. So in response, the exchanges have adapted. They're creating clear product categories and aligning with these transparency rules. But, and this is a big but, they've held firm on their core principle, pricing data based on its value and its use case. So what does all of this mean for you? Let's talk about the practical takeaways and move from theory to practice. It is so crucial to understand that the real cost of data goes way beyond the invoice. It includes the massive operational effort of managing all the policies, preparing for audits, and dealing with the really high costs of switching vendors. These are significant and often hidden expenses. So here's a practical playbook for navigating this complex landscape. First, align your internal language with your suppliers. Speak their language. Second, collect detailed usage data so you're always prepared for an audit. Third, when you negotiate, push for clear terms and fair audit processes. And finally, consider enterprise licenses to simplify those really complex situations. And we'll leave you with this final question. As transparency improves, will technology and regulation finally tame this beast of complexity, or will it just find a new way to evolve? The next few years are going to be very, very interesting to watch.
Hey, so that was the general introduction. Now I asked a slightly different question and I put together a view through AI of what the exchange's perspective on all of this is. So again, listen in to the exchange's perspective.
You've seen the bills, right? You know that feeling when you look at the cost of financial market data and just shake your head. It's so expensive. So today, we're going to flip the script a little bit. We're going to go behind the curtain and try to understand the story from the other side of the table, from the exchanges themselves. All right, let's just jump right in. The big question, the one that I'm sure is on everyone's mind, is simply why? Why does this data cost so much? For so many of us, it's a constant headache, a line item on the budget that just seems to get more complicated and more expensive year after year. Well, to really get a handle on the price, you have to understand the story they're telling. So what we're going to do is break down the logic, the official justification that the exchanges have spent years carefully building to explain their pricing and their policies. And their entire argument, really, it all boils down to 4 key ideas. They call them the 4 pillars of market data value. Let's take a look at what they are. Okay, so here they are. These four pillars are the absolute foundation of the exchange's entire philosophy. And the core idea tying them all together is this: data isn't just some accidental byproduct of trading, some exhaust fume coming off the engine. No, they argue it's a deliberate product in and of itself, with its own costs and its own value. Let's dig in. So, the first pillar, this joint product concept, is probably the most important one to get your head around. In their view, you simply can't separate the data from the market itself. It means the cost of the data is tied to everything that makes the market function reliably, from the high-tech trading engines, to the cybersecurity teams, to the market surveillance folks, the whole shebang. Pillar 2 is all about quality and risk transfer. And this is where it gets pretty interesting. The argument is that you're not just buying bytes of data, you're buying a guarantee, a promise that the data is accurate, complete, and legally sound. The exchange is basically saying, hey, we're taking on the risk of making sure this data is perfect so you don't have to. And the fourth pillar, fairness across uses, is all about tackling that massive shift from human traders to algorithms. You hear terms like non-display and derived data, right? Well, that's really just industry jargon for data being used by automated systems without a person looking at a screen. The exchanges want to make sure these systems, which get enormous value from the data, are paying what they see as their fair share. So, okay, that's the theory, that's the philosophy. But how has this actually played out in the real world? Let's see how these ideas have been put into practice over the last few years. This timeline really tells the story of that evolution. If you go back to 2018, the big push was to finally get a real handle on the rules for automated trading. By 2021, the focus shifted to Europe and meeting their new transparency regulations. More recently, it's been all about embracing the cloud, and looking ahead, the big goal is to make those dreaded audits more predictable for everyone. And you can really see here, this has been a multi-front strategy. They've adapted their products with clearer categories and a big push into cloud delivery. They've updated their policies with more standardized language. And on the commercial side, they've really stuck to their guns on value-based pricing, while also offering things like enterprise licenses to make life a little easier for the really big firms. Now, these principles might be global, but the execution, well, the execution is definitely local. Let's take a look at how different regions put these ideas into practice. And here's the key difference right away. Europe, largely driven by regulators, is all about transparency. We're talking public fee schedules, unbundled products, crystal clear definitions. North America, though, has a very different tiered system. You get a basic, consolidated feed, and then you have the option to pay up for the premium, faster, more detailed proprietary feeds directly from the exchanges. The Asia-Pacific region? That's a completely different story. It is far more fragmented. The rules change on a market-by-market basis, not as a regional block. The big focus there is also on getting the rules for automated trading right, but this lack of harmonization means you have to navigate the specific nuances of each and every country, and that can be a major, major challenge. So, we've covered the exchange's philosophy, and we've seen how it plays out across the globe. But what does all of this actually mean for you? Let's talk strategy. Okay, here's a practical 4-step playbook. First, mirror their taxonomy. Structure your internal systems to reflect how exchanges classify data. It just makes life easier. Second, track everything. Know exactly who is using what data and how. Third, when you negotiate, push for what we'll call policy hygiene, cleaner, simpler contracts. And finally, seriously look into enterprise or cloud options. They could dramatically simplify your operations and cut down on compliance risk. To wrap things up, let's take a quick look into the crystal ball and see what the future might hold for market data. There are 4 huge trends you should be watching. First is the rise of what's being called tape economics in Europe, as these basic consolidated feeds start to compete with the premium ones. Second, more global policy convergence, which should make things easier for everyone. Third, that relentless shift to the cloud for data distribution isn't stopping. And finally, there's a real push to make audits more standardized and hopefully a little less painful. So here's the bottom line. The exchanges say the high cost of data is the price we all pay for a modern, resilient, and trustworthy market. But as technology continues to accelerate at a blistering pace, the real multi-billion-dollar question remains. Who should ultimately be the one to pay for the innovation and the integrity that we all depend on?
This time, we're going to have a perspective from customer firms, but the market data teams that are in customer firms. What do they think about this? What do they feel about this? Onwards.
All right, let's talk about something that's a huge point of friction in the financial world, the cost of market data. But here's the twist. The real frustration isn't actually about the price tag. Nope. As we're about to see, it's about something way deeper and, honestly, a lot more complicated.
This quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It's not that companies don't want to pay for good quality data. Of course they do. The real problem is this fog of uncertainty around what they're paying for, how that price could suddenly change, and whether the way they're using the data is even compliant.
So that's the big question, right? If everybody agrees that quality data is valuable and worth paying for, then why is there so much burnout and frustration on the ground? Well, let's dive in and unpack this. Okay, first things first, we have to get our heads around the idea that the real pain point isn't the number you see on an invoice. It's the day-to-day reality, both operationally and emotionally, for the teams who are stuck managing this stuff. I mean, try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. You feel constantly at risk, just waiting for an audit to pop up and find some honest mistake. You're trying to help your business innovate, roll out new features, but you're constantly getting tangled up in this dense web of different policies. You're literally caught in the middle, and it feels pretty hopeless. That's the mood in the trenches.
So all that frustration, it starts to build into something much, much bigger than the direct fees. And this is where we start to uncover the true hidden costs that are causing all this agitation.
The source material calls this the administrative tax, and I think that's just a brilliant way to put it. Now, it's not a real tax from the government, of course, but it acts just like one. It drains your resources, your time, and your energy, all stuff that could be spent building better products, but instead it's just going towards staying compliant with confusing rules. And this isn't just some vague idea. This tax gets paid through a relentless cycle of work. First, companies have to build and maintain these really complex internal systems just to track who's using what data and how. Then, every single time a vendor decides to update a policy, which happens all the time, teams have to drop everything and spend hours remapping their usage. And all of this is happening under the constant threat of the next big audit. You know, the source material uses this fantastic metaphor. It says that the people doing this work feel like they're constantly trying to translate between different dialects from each supplier. But there's no universal dictionary, and a single mistranslation can be incredibly expensive. And this right here shows you the problem perfectly. Take a term like display use. You'd think that means one thing, right? Wrong. It can have dozens of slightly different definitions depending on who you're talking to. Or derived data. That's a huge one. It's often super vague and just wide open to interpretation. Even something as basic as how you count usage. Is it per person, per device, per app? Without a standard, you're just lost in a maze. In this maze, it creates this massive audit burden. The rules are all over the place, look-back windows, penalty formulas that can be wildly different from one vendor to the next. It creates this constant fear, this feeling that you're just one tiny spreadsheet error away from a huge financial penalty. And all that time spent putting together evidence packs for auditors, that's time that's not being spent on innovation. Right. So this isn't just an operational headache. This is the really crucial part. All of this complexity acts like a giant handbrake on the business, slowing down innovation to a crawl. Just think about it. A product manager has a great, simple idea. Maybe a new backtest for a trading strategy, or a cool new analytics widget for clients. But wait, to do that, you need market data. And suddenly, that simple great idea triggers this cascade of complex legal and policy reviews across a bunch of different vendors, each with their own special set of rules. The idea gets completely bogged down before it can even get off the ground. So you're probably thinking, why not just switch to a better vendor? Well, if only it were that simple. It's incredibly hard. When you try to switch, you uncover all these hidden dependencies you never knew you had. You have to revalidate all your models. And here's the kicker. Some contracts actually require you to delete all your historical data when you leave. It's a massive barrier that basically locks you in. Now, what's interesting is that while this is a universal problem, it doesn't look exactly the same everywhere you go. The specific challenges kind of have different flavors depending on the region. So in Europe, for example, regulators have actually put out some pretty clear rules on paper about fairness and transparency. But the frustration for customers is that there's this huge lag between what the rules say and what their actual contracts look like day to day. Then you hop over to North America. A key challenge there is trying to manage the combination of the basic consolidated data feeds with all the different faster proprietary feeds from individual exchanges.
The administrative tax here comes from having to prove exactly which data source was used by which application. It's a puzzle. And in the Asia-Pacific region, it's just a total patchwork. If you're a firm operating across major hubs like Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, you're dealing with different, often very strict rules in each separate market. And that makes it almost impossible to standardize anything.
Okay, so after all of that complexity and frustration, what's the solution? What do customers actually want? Well, it turns out to be surprisingly simple. Overwhelmingly, the top demands from customers boil down to just two things: clarity and predictability. They just want to know what the rules of the game are, and they want to be confident that those rules aren't going to change on them overnight. Portability is important, sure, but it comes after those two basics.
And when you look at the specific wish list, it's really just a call for common sense. People want uniform definitions. They want public policies with a 90-day heads-up for any changes. They want audits and penalties to be predictable and fair. They want compliance to be done with modern APIs, not endless spreadsheets. And at the end of the day, they want the freedom to choose the best data for their business without being punished for it.
This final quote really brings us full circle, and the message could not be clearer. This is not about getting a handout or asking for free data. It's a plea for the business side of market data, the contracts, the policies, to just catch up with the technical reality of how data is actually used today.
Ultimately, the path forward seems pretty clear, and the solutions feel achievable. You know, the prize for the first company to really fix this is huge. We're talking faster innovation, lower risk, and a much healthier relationship between data suppliers and their customers. So the only real question left is, who's going to be the first to step up and actually do it?
So that was the view from the market data teams, but there's another dynamic going on here, especially in Europe, and that is the market structure people, the people on the sell side and the buy side that have a wider perspective. They sit probably in the business, they are in charge of market structure, and they've been lobbying frantically to get adjustments made on how exchange data is provided. So this next section explains a lot more about the perspective from a market structure point of view.
All right, today we're going to try and solve a puzzle that's right at the heart of Europe's financial markets. You see, it's a system that's incredibly sophisticated on one hand, but it's also facing this really fundamental challenge, one that affects pretty much everyone, from the biggest global banks all the way down to individual investors. So, the big question is, how do we fix it?
And that brings us to the essential paradox, right? How can one of the world's most advanced financial systems also feel like it's stuck in the past when it comes to its own data? It's a weird contradiction, and it's one that market leaders are, frankly, determined to resolve.
This quote from some of the industry leaders, it just nails the problem perfectly. The technology, it's lightning fast, it's powerful, no question there. But the administrative side, how data is actually shared and licensed and sold, it's broken up into all these tiny little pieces. And that fragmentation, that's the real issue we're digging into.
So, let's start with the high-tech but fragmented side of this market. To really get why this is such a big deal, we first have to understand the role that market data plays. And trust me, it isn't just a bunch of numbers on a screen. It's literally the lifeblood of the entire system.
A great way to think about it is like this. Market data is the connective tissue that holds the whole financial body together. If you don't have a clear, single stream of data, well, it's almost impossible to know if you're getting the best price for a trade. It's harder for regulators to keep an eye on things, and it really erodes investor confidence. It is absolutely essential. Now, here's the good news in all of this. Despite how complicated it all sounds, pretty much everyone, we're talking banks, asset managers, regulators, you name it, they all agree on where they need to end up. There is a shared destination in mind. And this is that common ground, what they all want. First, a single, real-time view of stocks and bonds across all of Europe. Second, they need the data to be affordable, with really clear and simple pricing. The whole system also needs strong, neutral governance, so nobody feels like it's rigged. And finally, it has to be built on tech standards that make it super easy for everyone to plug into and use. Okay, so if everyone agrees on the end goal, what's all the debate about? Well, it really boils down to the different priorities of the two main players on this journey. You've got the sell side, which are the banks, and the buy side, which are the investors and asset managers. So here's where you can see those two perspectives. The banks, the sell side, their main focus is on completeness. They want all the data, including the bids and offers that happen before a trade goes through. They argue this keeps the market stable.
and they get a little worried that strict price controls could actually hurt the quality of the data. Now, the investors, the buy side, they're focused on one thing: getting the best possible deal. So for them, affordability and getting that data in real time is absolutely crucial.
So, how do we actually fix this? Well, the blueprint that's been proposed isn't just one thing. It's more like a 1-2 punch, a combination of two really powerful tools designed to bring it all together, something called a consolidated tape and a brand new set of rules.
First up, let's talk about the consolidated tape, or CT for short. The easiest way to think of this is like a single, super reliable stock ticker for the entire continent. So instead of trying to grab bits and pieces of data from dozens of different exchanges, you get one unified, clean stream of everything. But here's the thing. Not just any old tape is going to work. For this to be successful, it has to be genuinely timely, especially with that pre-trade data for stocks we were just talking about. It also must get data from every single trading venue, no exceptions. And, critically, it needs to be simple for everyone to adopt and have a fair price that actually ensures its quality over the long run.
The second tool is this thing called Reasonable Commercial Basis, or RCB. Now, this is important. This is not about the government setting prices. It's all about cleaning up the contracts. I love this term for it, contract hygiene. It's just a set of rules to make sure the data agreements are fair, totally transparent, and predictable for everybody involved.
And here's what that hygiene actually looks like in practice. It means policies have to be public and easy for anyone to understand. Data has to be sold on its own. You can't be forced to buy it bundled with a bunch of other services you don't want. Any audits have to be predictable and fair. And this last one is a biggie. It's a system designed to stop companies from having to pay for the exact same data twice, which is a huge headache right now.
So we have the blueprint, we have the tools, but how does this thing actually get built? Let's take a look at the road ahead and the concrete steps needed to make this whole unified market a reality.
The action plan is actually pretty clear, and everybody has a job to do. Regulators, you got to keep the whole process on schedule. The exchanges, you have to contribute your data consistently and adopt these fair policies. The folks actually building the CT, you need to engineer a rock-solid, reliable service. And finally, the data vendors. You need to simplify your billing and get rid of those duplicate charges.
This quote, I think, really captures the mood in the market right now. The big philosophical debates, they're mostly over. The work that's left is practical. It's all about execution now. Stitching all that high-quality data together, writing up clear rules, and making the whole new system really simple to adopt.
So after all that, you might be wondering, why does this matter so much? Well, the payoff is huge. A unified data view means better prices for everyone's investments. We're talking everything from pension funds to your personal portfolio. It makes it easier for money to flow across borders, which is great for the economy. And ultimately, it just boosts confidence in the entire European market. These aren't just little technical fixes. These are real, tangible gains.
So the technical blueprint is there. The goals are clear. But the final question, really, is a human one. Can all these different groups, who are often fierce competitors, actually work together to build this unified, transparent market that everyone agrees Europe desperately needs? That's the real challenge ahead.
So, what lies between? It almost sounds like a horror story. What I'm trying to get at is we've talked about the exchange perspective. We've talked about two different customer perspectives, the market data teams and the market structure people. But there are things that go on in between. There are a whole series of companies and entities that operate and try to help both sides of this equation work better, or the inventory management companies, the benchmarking companies, the cloud pump companies, the connectivity, the consultancies. There's a whole range of them. And again, in this next section, we'll have their perspective.
All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about market data, but specifically, we're going to peel back a layer that most people never see. It's this crucial, kind of complex world of intermediaries that sits right in the middle of everything. This is where the customer's pain and the exchange's principles collide. And trust me, it's where all the action is.
So, to really get this, you have to understand the two sides of the story. On one side, you've got the customer. And frankly, they're anxious. They just want things to be clear. They want to know what their bill is going to be next month, and, let's be honest, they want that bill to be lower. But then, on the other side, you have the exchange. They're all about the quality of their data, defending the massive investment they make to produce it, and they believe its value and its price should depend on how you're using it. You can already see the tension, right?
And this tension creates what we can call the Great Divide in market data. It's a huge chasm.
You've got this need for simplicity and cost-cutting on one side, and the principles of quality and value-based pricing on the other.
So how do you even begin to connect these two completely different worlds without them just clashing all the time? Well, that's where this middle layer comes into play. It's the structure that's literally built to span that chasm.
The best way to think about an intermediary is as a bridge. Its entire job is to connect the customer's pain, the high costs, the insane complexity, with the exchange's core principles, like quality and value. It's supposed to turn what could be a constant battle into a system that actually works. Now, when this is firing on all cylinders, these intermediaries are like master translators. They take a super dense 50-page exchange policy and turn it into real, working, automated controls. They help a company achieve its business goals while making sure they don't break the rules of their data license. But here's the catch. When it goes wrong, this layer can actually make things worse, adding more tools, more interfaces, and just amplifying the complexity it was meant to solve.
So, what is this bridge actually made of? What are the pillars holding the whole thing up? Let's take a look at the key players that make up this intermediary playbook.
Yeah, this middle layer isn't just one company or one product, it's a whole ecosystem of specialists. You've got platforms that handle inventory and compliance, benchmarkers that focus on pricing, consultants who parachute in for big projects, cloud and network providers that handle the delivery, and neutral software stacks that offer flexibility. Each one has a very specific job to do.
Okay, first up, inventory and compliance platforms. Their main gig is to take these really complex rule sets, like Europe's rate card bundles, or RCB, which are just words on paper, and bake them right into a company's systems. This creates what's called contract hygiene. For the customer, this is awesome, because it suddenly shows them where they're wasting money and gives them control. And for the exchange, it gives them the perfect audit trail they need to prove usage.
I love this quote because it perfectly captures the role of benchmarkers. You know how contract negotiations can get, right? There's a lot of emotion, a lot of this just doesn't feel fair. Well, benchmarkers come in and just cut right through all that noise. They bring objective, hard data to the table about what other firms are paying for the same stuff. They literally turn subjective feelings into cold, hard evidence.
And then you have the consultancies and managed services. Just think of these guys as the shock absorbers for your business. When you hit a huge pothole, like a surprise audit, a massive data migration, or a sudden policy change from an exchange, these are the partners that step in to absorb the impact and handle that spike in complexity. The only thing you have to watch out for is becoming too dependent on them. You want them to transfer that knowledge back to your own team.
Cloud providers are absolutely changing the game here. They're making the data and the computers that process the data co-resident. That just means they're putting them in the same virtual room, which is a huge deal for speed and scale. It's exactly what customers want. Of course, there are still friction points, things like data egress costs and figuring out who has rights to what across different clouds.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty good, right? We have this bridge, it's solving problems, but it's not quite that simple. This is where things get really interesting, because the strength of this bridge is constantly being tested by the fact that the intermediaries themselves have their own business models, and their incentives don't always line up perfectly with everyone else's.
And this table just lays that push and pull out perfectly. Look, on one side, everybody wants clear terms and standards. That helps everyone. But on the other side, where things rub, for some of these intermediaries, complexity is actually profitable. More complexity means more services to sell. At the same time, exchanges want to charge different prices based on value, but customers want to build systems where all data is treated the same, no matter where it came from. See the problem?
So, what's the solution? It's not about getting rid of the bridge, it's about making the bridge better. The real path forward is all about creating transparency through controls that you can actually use. The holy grail here is this idea. You encode the rules of a data license one time, in a way a machine can read, and then you reuse that same code everywhere. That way, any difference in price is on purpose, it's transparent, not just some accident of a messy system.
So if we look down the road, where's all this headed? The entire middle layer is shifting towards something you could call evidence by default. The bridge to tomorrow is being built on this fundamental idea that the policy and the proof of how you use data have to be baked into the data itself.
And you can already see a pretty clear three-step path taking shape. First, you're going to see these standardized policy templates become way more common. Second, pricing is going to be tied much more directly to how much you actually consume. And third, and this one is the real game changer, telemetry becomes the new currency. These super detailed data about how you use data,
That becomes the main thing you negotiate with. At the end of the day, this is what it all boils down to. The firms that are going to win in this new world, whether they're customers, exchanges, or the intermediaries themselves, are the ones who master this model of encode once and make it visible everywhere. This is probably the closest we're ever going to get to a truce between the customer's desperate need for simplicity and the exchange's demand to be paid for value.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. As we move from these long legal documents to automated systems, as we shift from policy as prose to policy as code, a brand new question pops up. Who gets to be the programmer? When policy becomes code, who writes the most important rules for the market's new operating system? That's something to think about.
And think about it we shall. I hope you enjoyed those little video clips. I tried to link them together. It just gives an overarching perspective of the debate between exchanges and customer firms. And that debate will rage on. There's much more to be talked about. So let me know what you think about this style, this format that I'm trying to do. I can't always get a guest. I'm going to do guest episodes once a month and then some episodes like this in between. So thank you very much and farewell again. See you soon.